The assertion that Israel creates violations in Rafah typically refers to accusations that Israeli military actions in the area breach international laws or norms. These violations can be viewed from various perspectives, including human rights, humanitarian law, and geopolitical considerations. Here are some of the main points related to such claims. Types of violations. 1. Human rights violations. Civilian casualties. Israeli strikes in Rafah have often resulted in civilian casualties. International human rights organizations argue that these attacks sometimes lack sufficient distinction between military targets and civilian areas, potentially violating international humanitarian law. Destruction of property. Bombing campaigns may destroy homes, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, leading to significant humanitarian crises. This raises concerns about proportionality and necessity in military operations. 2. Humanitarian law violations. Blockade and siege. The blockade of Gaza, including the control over the Rafah crossing, is frequently criticized. Critics argue that it constitutes collective punishment, affecting the entire population of Gaza by restricting access to essential goods and services. Access to aid. Restricting the flow of humanitarian aid through Rafah, especially during conflicts, can exacerbate suffering. Ensuring that humanitarian aid reaches civilians is a key principle of international humanitarian law. 3. Geopolitical and diplomatic issues. Violations of ceasefires. There have been numerous ceasefires brokered in the Gaza conflict, many of which have been short-lived. Violations of these ceasefires by either side lead to renewed hostilities and further suffering for civilians. International condemnation. Israeli actions in Rafah and other parts of Gaza often attract condemnation from various international bodies, including the United Nations, which sometimes accuse Israel of disproportionate use of force. Recent developments. Without access to the most current data beyond 2023, specific recent instances of violations would need to be verified with up-to-date news sources. However, the general pattern includes military operations. Israeli airstrikes and ground operations in Rafah targeting militant infrastructure can lead to allegations of excessive use of force and failure to protect civilians. Blockade enforcement. Ongoing enforcement of the blockade and restrictions on the Rafah crossing, impacting the movement of people and goods, continues to be a significant point of contention. International response. United Nations. The UN frequently calls for investigations into alleged violations and urges both Israel and Palestinian militants to adhere to international laws. Non-governmental organizations. NGOs organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch monitor and report on the situation, often condemning actions they see as violations of human rights and international law. Diplomatic pressure. Various countries and international bodies exert diplomatic pressure on Israel to modify its policies and actions regarding Gaza and Rafah specifically. Recent events in Rafah have been marked by intense conflict and significant humanitarian issues. Israeli airstrikes and ground operations in Rafah have intensified as part of a broader offensive against Hamas, following a deadly rocket attack from the group. This escalation has resulted in numerous casualties and widespread displacement among the Palestinian population. According to reports, Israeli strikes on Rafah killed 16 people following the initial Hamas rocket attack that claimed the lives of 3 Israeli soldiers near Kerem Shalom. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, have since taken control of key areas, including the Gazan side of the Rafah crossing to Egypt, which is a critical entry point for aid. The humanitarian situation in Rafah is dire. The United Nations has reported that around 80,000 people have been displaced due to the ongoing bombardment, with many seeking refuge in UNRWA shelters. The UN has also highlighted severe shortages of food and essential supplies, as access to aid has been severely restricted. Diplomatic efforts have been ongoing to secure a ceasefire, with Hamas agreeing to a proposal mediated by Egypt and Qatar. However, the terms of this proposal differ from Israel's demands, leading to continued negotiations. The Biden administration has expressed opposition to the invasion of Rafah, citing the massive displacement and humanitarian concerns. These developments underscore the urgent need for a resolution to the conflict and the importance of humanitarian aid to support those affected in Rafah and the broader Gaza region.